Pulsar Studio.
Video games are the youngest artistic medium, and since their emergence, they have shown that even the most beloved franchises need harmony between narrative and design. This is Checkpoint, and today we're going to discover an example of it. Since its launch with Microsoft's first console in 2001, Halo has been a franchise that has earned the love and recognition of the industry. This due to its contribution on the development and expansion of consoles as platforms for video games and the action and shooter genre. Even when existing in a genre where there is a little room to maneuver in innovation, each installment has successfully pushed the genre and platform forward and has been well received since the developers have been able to leverage available technology to refine the design and gameplay and deliver a new episode of a well-defined and well-told story. After inheriting the baton from Bungie to direct the future of the franchise, 343 Industries, composed of a team of veterans in the development of Halo, launched in December 2012 the first title under their responsibility and demonstrated that they were capable of taking on the legacy of Bungie and carried it forward. But in 2015, they launched the second game of the main line under their charge. Then, they met with the first setback in the reception and criticism. Despite being the best achieved title in terms of game feel, gameplay, and multiplayer, Halo 5 Guardians is the title that generated the least appreciation for the campaign and the story. And this happened as a result of a clash between narrative and gameplay. Handling the super soldier, better known as Master Chief, has always been something special in the Halo universe. The Spartans were described as almost extinct legendary soldiers, with the Master Chief appearing as the last of his kind, which made him even more special. The condition of Super Soldier was achieved thanks to the design and gameplay, which put the execution of those special abilities in the hands of the player, such as an overhuman resistance with a rechargeable life shield, an unerring shooting precision, and the ability to take the best decisions at every moment of battle. Players became Spartan soldiers themselves, hand in hand with the Master Chief. Bungie ventured to explore parallel stories in which Master Chief was not the vehicle of the experience. But in developing them, they took care to create a narrative space in which these titles had their own place and relevance in the events within the overall known story, in addition to seeking to expand and vary the experience, but always as side titles and parallel stories in the style of spin-offs. Halo 3 ODST sought to create an experience of less action and with a detective and mystery twist, in which it was not necessary to embody a super soldier and instead take control of an ODST special soldier, leaving important events of the story that take place between the events of Halo 2 and Halo 3. Halo Reach served as a prequel to the main saga, and for the first time showed other Spartans in action thanks to the narrative context that put them with the task of defending the planet Reach from the invasion of the Covenant and saving humanity's only hope that would be passed on the hands of Master Chief. In Halo 5, the developers set out to make a mix between a main installment in the saga, where the most well-known and beloved characters have a role, but at the same time take an alternative path like the proposed by Halo ODST or Reach and expand the cast of characters and narrative arcs. To encourage the exploration of something new and different to keep a 15-year-old franchise fresh and relevant is not a questionable decision. The problem arises in the execution and some specific decisions that, on the one hand, underestimated vital elements of the franchise, and on the other, did not find a suitable place between narrative and the gameplay. The creative director of the title confessed that their interpretation of the role played by Master Chief was different from that of the fans and followers of the saga, and one of the key premises for the vision of this installment was to expand the universe and introduce new characters that players could know and appreciate. But it is difficult to change the feeling towards a character who not only gave life to the universe and the experience in that medium, but was at every key moment to progress and grow the franchise, even in the relaunch that they themselves did with Halo 4. In this installment, the introduction of the new characters and the new protagonist is somewhat violent and without prior context. The game begins with a squad of Spartans, Osiris, demonstrating the ability and repertoire of resources for combat that a Spartan super soldier has. For the first 30 minutes, there is no sign of the Master Chief, and Jameson Locke is introduced as the squad's leader and new protagonist. However, for both veteran fans and new players, these characters are unknown, except perhaps Buck, for those who played Halo 3 ODST, but it is also a mystery how he got there or how he became a Spartan. For the first time in a title of the main line, there is more than one Spartan that has its explanation in the canon of the franchise, but it is confusing for those who do not closely follow the detail of its content. The developers shouldn't expect players to be savvy about the universe on their own or underestimate the value of the franchise's best known and most loved elements that continue to draw them to it, especially if this is an episode that continues the events of the series' previous installment in which the Master Chief and Cortana were the protagonists. The new protagonist that the players will control during most of the experience not only takes an important role without any mention or previous introduction, but he does so by facing the most beloved protagonists of the franchise with a personality that is not very friendly or charismatic, making it difficult to generate empathy with him. This is curious because even in game dialogue, the characters themselves recognize that they will not be very well received for having to hunt down and catch a legend so loved and appreciated. Besides, it's strange and abrupt to see Master Chief and Cortana as the villains of the story when for 15 years we have relied on them to save the universe and the human species in countless epic battles. But those are all creative decisions that developers chose as the narrative for this work, and many of these elements used are interesting in their own right. The problem is that all of this new story and narrative was not accompanied by the design of the levels or the progression in the campaign, where that action-packed presentation that shows what it will be like to embody one of the new abundant Spartans is very far away from the reality when seeing all these super soldiers in action. One of the strong clashes between narrative and gameplay is the fact of having teams of 4 Spartans for each mission. Until now, being a Spartan was something special, because one alone was capable of eliminating entire armies of aliens. Having 4 Spartans together creates a break in the balance of the narrative, and in turn is incongruous in execution, because none of these super soldiers end up being more useful in combat than a simple marine. To reduce that dissonance and exploit the new mobility resources that the Spartans have and that they are present on the mechanics, larger and wider scenarios were designed than ever on the franchise, plagued by more aggressive enemies and with better aim than in past installments, and that results in a greater difficulty for the player. This is combined with an element of collaboration between the team where instead of just dying and restoring the checkpoint, it is possible to assist down teammates as well as being assisted. The problem with this is that the artificial intelligence design of the 3 accompanying Spartans is very limited, generating that most of the time the player ends up dying in the same way and also has to painfully observe how these super soldiers fail in the attempt to assist her, creating a higher level of frustration and a sense of wasted time. Another major clash between narrative and gameplay is in the design of levels and enemies. Although the narrative decision was to introduce new characters, the developers decided to give Master Chief a small place and be the player's vehicle in 3 missions. This is more harmful than beneficial, because it is impossible to not miss a character with whom so many hours and experiences have been shared if you have the chance to control him and experience alone with him as in the old days. The game begins with Team Osiris rescuing Dr. Halsey from a group of Covenant and following the footsteps of Soldier 117. However, throughout the first half of the game, Team Osiris faces Promethean enemies and Master Chief's team faces Covenant enemies. Although this difference lacks narrative sense, it also affects the gameplay because the Promethean enemies are much faster, dynamic, and require much greater precision to annihilate them, causing it to be easier to be shot down by them and needing more help from a real team. while the Covenant enemies have a design that encourages the experience of handling a super soldier being easier to defeat, but in a subtle and not obvious way. Additionally, the Master Chief's missions are more varied and with more elements, creating a more enjoyable experience using this character than using Locke and Team Osiris. Having a less pleasant experience with a character and team that you want to introduce during an entire half of the game is too much. By the time the story takes a turn and proposes Master Chief again as an ally, the feeling of frustration and disappointment is already present in the player, in addition to having created a great desire to return to handle Spartan 117 and not give the opportunity to do so. Even though the experience improves in the second half, and the visual style and performance of the game are impressive throughout the entire experience, the problems of dissonance between narrative and gameplay are impossible to forget. Surely, the developers in 343 Industries learned the value of respecting the essential elements of a franchise and the importance of harmoniously marrying any narrative decision with the gameplay. On October 8, 2021, we will be able to see the result of this learning, and I have no doubt that it will be something very special. And you? What did you think of the narrative and gameplay of Halo 5? Do you think that the new characters and protagonists should take place in the saga, and how should they be introduced? Leave it in the comments below. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Checkpoint. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this to keep discovering the art in making and designing video games. See you next time!